Always there, clean, safe, and abundant. Water, the essence of life. We need it every day, but we often forget that safe drinking water starts way before it gets to our tap. Before the pipes that lead to our home, even before the complicated process of treatment and disinfection that makes raw water drinkable. It starts here at the source. Our source water can be from surface water, like our rivers, lakes, and streams, or groundwater, the aquifers that lie beneath the earth. Public water suppliers tap into these sources to provide us with our drinking water. Our source of drinking water, whether it comes from the surface or underground, is affected by what happens on the land around it. And although we don't mean to, our daily activities often end up polluting our most essential resource. Whether it's someone using too much fertilizer on their lawn, runoff manure from a farm, oil from a leaky fuel tank, or a town allowing an industrial site on top of a water supply recharge area, we all contribute to the contamination of our water. Contamination of our source water supplies can cause disease and become very costly to clean, and sometimes that contaminated water might be impossible to clean and the source must be abandoned.
Although much of it lies underground, there are places where the sheer scale of our water system emerges, glinting in the sunlight. These are our Great Lakes and reservoirs, over 2,000 of them, capable of holding over 700 billion gallons of water. Boreholes suck water from far beneath the ground. Pumps feed from rivers up and down the nation. And they're all connected by an almost dazingly vast network of pipes, some under the ground, some overground. Laid end to end, they would stretch round the world 10 times. On an average day, this system apparently carries enough water to fill 18 million bathtubs. But amazingly, supply is just one half of the vast network of piping that stretches across Britain. The other half has to deal with what we flush away and what's in it.
In 1973, the government introduced the Water Act, which created 10 water authorities that were later privatised. They took over from the local authorities and water boards, and their role was to plan and control all users of water in each river catchment area. Throughout the 1980s, there was a growing realisation that even greater reinvestment was needed to raise levels of service and quality across the whole water industry, since central government didn't have enough money available. Privatisation was seen as the best way of generating enough income to pay for essential overhauls, as well as improvements to comply with demanding European legislation. Household customers currently have no choice about who provides their water. Unlike gas and electricity, it is entirely dependent upon where they live. The regulators ensure that customers are getting value for money and a good quality product when and where they need it. Ofwat, the Water and Sewerage Industry Economic Regulator, sets price limits for each water company every 5 years, in a process known as the Periodic Review. This 5-year period is also referred to as the AMP, Asset Management Plan period. Prices set in 2009, the period 2010 to 2015, known as AMP 5. Each water company has to submit an annual return covering its activities to Ofwat. This is known as the June return. This is the primary source of regulatory information and enables Ofwat to monitor and compare the performance of the different companies. Ofwat use this information to assess performance against the 5-year regulatory contract. The June return also includes information on companies' service performance in various areas. The regulator uses this information to publish reports
when prices were set in 2009 for the 5-year period, there were a very small number of items which were impossible to quantify. Neither we nor the regulator knew how much we would have to spend on those things. So the regulator's decision was to make no allowance for them in price limits, on the understanding that we would come back and claim for them later in the period if they proved to be significant, and they have. So most things, once their price limits are set, are at our risk, but these specific items were listed as ones that we could go back and claim subsequently. We've had to buy £290 million worth of land for construction sites we're going to need to build the big new super sewer under London, the Thames Tideway Tunnel. We have had to adopt, because of a government decision, 24,000 miles of private sewers. Now in 2009 nobody knew, we knew that was coming, but nobody knew when, and nobody knew what the cost of running those sewers would be. At the same time, because of the economic downturn, the bad debt situation has got much worse because the short-term rental sector, which gives us problems, there's much more turnover of tenants, and sometimes we can't track them down, and so money has to be written off there. And then there's an increase in Environment Agency charges that was completely unexpected. So those were all things completely outside the normal day-to-day running of the business. It's a matter for the regulator to decide, but if we had tried to take a guess at how much these things would be, we might have ended up putting bills up unnecessarily and then having to pay money back. Now, nobody wants that either. So I think there's a balance to be struck here. This is the first time that we have ever applied in 20-odd years of being regulated, first time I've ever had to apply using this mechanism, and it's because these items have all come together and they're all significant. They are hitting particularly at Thames. We're the only ones building a tunnel. We've got the worst bad debt problem. We've got the most private sewers. And it's because they add up to a really significant amount over and above what we've already absorbed as a company that we're making this application.
Drinking water quality in England and Wales is regulated by the Drinking Water Inspectorate. The DWI ensures all companies supply water that is safe to drink and complies with all national and European standards. The company will report test results of water samples taken at customers' taps, treatment works and reservoirs to the DWI on a monthly basis. To verify our results, the DWI carry out audits and can inspect any sites or activities with little or no warning. They will conduct an investigation. Incidents that affect drinking water quality, follow up any customer complaints relating to water quality. River pollution, environmental quality, water resource planning and flooding is regulated by the Environment Agency. They are a public body set up to protect and improve the environment and issue abstraction licences which allow to take water from rivers and permits which they issue discharge treated effluent back to the rivers.
Did you know that small floating particles in drinking water can make you sick? Imagine we have a super powerful microscope and we can zoom into the...
What will we find? What are these small floating particles and how do they float? These particles are of two types: inorganic, like clay, silt, and mineral oxides, and organic, such as algae, protozoa, and bacteria. The bacteria, once ingested by humans, can sometimes be fatal. All of these small particles are able to float because they are not heavy enough to settle to the bottom by gravity. Suspended particles that are too light and small to settle are called colloids. When looked at together, these colloids cause a state of cloudiness or haziness known as turbidity. The more cloudy a fluid looks, the more turbid it is. Here we see 4 beakers of water with increasing levels of turbidity from left to right. There is a relation between turbidity and the risk of getting a disease. Science shows that the more turbid the drinking water is, the higher the risk of getting sick is. Now, why is this? This is because toxic compounds can adsorb, that is, stick to, the surface of the suspended colloids. The more colloids there are, the more toxic the water can become. These toxic materials and bacteria can cause cholera, salmonellosis, hepatitis A, dysentery, and E. coli infection. These illnesses affect and kill millions of people a year and are especially dangerous to children whose weak immune systems cannot provide an adequate defense. Fortunately, we can do something about this. One of the very practical ways to clean this turbid water is called flocculation. Flocculation is the process in which colloids aggregate or come together to form larger particles called flocks by the addition of a chemical called a flocculant. Typical flocculants include alum and ferrics because they work well with high turbidity fluid mixtures. Now, let's demonstrate how flocculation works. First, we'll need to go out and collect some muddy water. Here are 2 beakers filled with the same amount of muddy river water. On the left is our control, which will remain untouched, and on the right, we'll add 3 milliliters of prepared flocculant solution. Then we'll stir for 2 minutes and wait. The colloids in the turbid water on the left may never settle, whereas with the addition of just a little bit of flocculant, the water on the right became clear. In order to make this water potable, it will require skimming and filtration and maybe some additional treatment. Let's explain how this flocculant business works. Almost all colloids have negatively charged surfaces. This means that positive ions, or charged particles in water, will attract to the colloid surface, forming a first layer. Recall how like poles of a magnet will repel, while opposite poles will attract. The same occurs with colloids in water. A diffuse layer, made up of a mix of positive and negative ions, will then surround the first, forming what is called a double layer. This double layer provides a repulsive force that prevents 2 colloids from sticking to each other. Once the flocculant is added, it adheres to the surfaces of the particles, compressing the double layer and allowing the colloids to stick to each other and form flocks. These flocks are now heavy enough to settle to the bottom by gravity.
In the UK, each of us uses an average of about 150 litres of water per day. Most of it's taken from rivers, but before it can be piped to our taps, it needs to go through a multi-stage treatment process.
Rainfall is seasonal and increasingly unpredictable. So we often use storage reservoirs to make sure there's always a supply for treatment. By passing water through mesh screens, we remove sticks, water weeds and other large foreign objects. The air takes some odours and gas from the water and allows some dissolved metal salts to separate to be filtered out. We add air by cascading the water down a tower, spraying it into the air or bubbling air through it. At this stage, there are still some fine pieces of matter suspended in the water, along with colour and bacteria. We add a precisely controlled amount of a coagulant like ferric or aluminium sulfate. This reacts with the material in water, making it all stick together to form what's known as floc. To make this flocculation happen, water and the coagulant have to be mixed together very quickly and thoroughly in a special device called a flash mixer.
The main goal of the coagulation-flocculation process is to reduce the turbidity in the water. Turbidity is a measure of the amount of suspended solids in a sample, which causes cloudiness. Removing turbidity can remove unwanted taste and odor compounds. Lower turbidity allows for higher rates of disinfection. What is a coagulant? A coagulant is a chemical that is added to water that causes small particles to come together to form larger particles that can settle due to gravity. In the United States, the predominant coagulant used is aluminum sulfate, or alum.
Next comes the clarification process. The floc forms itself into sludge and is separated in a specially designed tank called a clarifier. This sludge layer is called the sludge blanket. To control the blanket, sludge is periodically drained off, concentrated and removed for safe disposal.
Once the sediment sinks to the bottom of the tank, it has to be removed or it will build up and cause problems in the next step of the treatment process. Some sediment basins have cone-shaped bottoms where the sediment is collected. Others have bottoms that slope to one end or have squeegee baffles that very slowly scrape the bottom, collecting the sediment at one end. The sediment is then pumped out into a sludge basin. Factors affecting good sedimentation are surface area of the basin and the time. Time can be extended within the settling basin with baffling that makes the water flow very slowly in a zigzag pattern from one end of the basin to the other.
The water now needs filtration to get rid of any remaining particles. Water is filtered slowly through very fine sand or sand-like material.
Filtration is simply the passing of water through a permeable fabric or a bed of porous material, such as sand, that collects the suspended solids from an incoming flow. Some systems may use direct filtration. This is possible only when the raw water is of good quality, having low turbidity and few contaminants, even during storm events. When the water is of good quality, direct filtration and disinfection may be the only treatment required for safe drinking water. As the filters become clogged, they must be cleaned. This is accomplished through backwashing. Backwashing is reversing the flow and increasing the speed at which the water passes back through the filter. This blasts the clogged particles off and out of the filter.
For some river waters, we use ozone gas injection as a treatment stage. This can work in conjunction with GAC, or granular activated carbon treatment, where the water is filtered through carbon granules to take out any undesirable traces of largely natural organic materials. The carbon in these filters is removed and regenerated by heat, so it can be used again. Now the water's filtered and thoroughly cleaned, it's disinfected to make sure no harmful bacteria remain. A small, controlled amount of chlorine is the most effective method and provides essential customer protection. This method is used across most of the world. The chlorine has to stay in contact with the water for a period of time for effective disinfection. Last but not least, adjustments are made to the pH levels of the water during the treatment process so that it's neither too acid or alkaline. This helps pipework, fittings and the water itself. From the treatment works, water is fed into a huge mains pipe network which forms a grid around the region. This grid is then accessed directly to your home, and when you turn your tap on, it's available to you. Clean, safe drinking water.
Have you ever been curious where your drinking water comes from and how it is purified? You might be surprised to find out it all starts here. A man-made channel directs the water up to a river pump station. At this station, the water is raised to an elevation above the river level. The pump station is capable of pumping 1 million gallons per day. From the river pump station, the water travels flowing downhill to a reservoir. This reservoir also serves as a habitat for many kinds of wildlife. From the reservoir, the water flows to one treatment facility. To start the treatment process, water is pumped up into a rapid mix tank where alum and lime are introduced into the water. The lime adjusts the pH, and the alum begins the process of attracting foreign particles too small to be filtered. The particles clump together with the alum, forming larger particles that eventually sink to the bottom or can be filtered out. Inside the lab, a technician can run a test that simulates the rapid mix tank to determine the correct amount of alum needed for the particles, called floc, to form. From the rapid mix tank, water then flows into the first of two flocculation basins, where the water's motion is reduced, allowing the flock particles time to form larger particles. As time progresses, the particles get heavier and begin to sink to the bottom. As the particles are sinking, the water flows into sedimentation basins. In the sedimentation basins, the impurities settle to the bottom, where they are collected by sweeps, and the clean water exits the top of the tank on its way to the next step of filtration. Here you can see the water, which by this step in the process is already 95% clean, rising out of the top of the weirs in the sedimentation basin. The impurities that were collected by the sweeps are later pumped out of the system into a holding pond. The next step for the treated water is filtration. The water flows into a large tank in which the floor is a large sand and anthracite filter. Gravity pulls the water through the filter, capturing the remaining solid impurities. The final step of disinfection. Chlorine solution is introduced to the water after filtration for disinfection and before it is pumped out into the distribution system. Back in the lab, there are technicians that take hourly samples of the water at all stages of the process to ensure the quality remains consistent. At the same time, a computer system monitors the water quality minute by minute, 24 hours per day, and alerts technicians of any unwanted changes in the water quality. Technicians make adjustments to the chemical dose or water production rate as needed. Maintenance personnel also take care of calibration of instruments and maintenance of equipment. And this entire process, from start to finish, continues day and night, 24 hours per day, 7 days a week and 365 days a year.
Well, behind me is Hanningfield Reservoir. It's a man-made reservoir and it's filled up from the River Blackwater and Chelmer. The water is actually a lowland river water, so there's lots of nutrients in there, lots of algae and some dirt. And it's our store of water to start treating in the giant Hanningfield treatment works. The site covers an area of some 28 hectares and provides drinking water to about 600,000 people. To become drinking water, the water needs to pass through several treatment stages. As many of these are hidden from view, I'll illustrate some of those stages with the aid of computer animation. The first part of the process is where we add ozone to the water, and this helps disable the algae. These are microscopic green plants. Once killed off, the algal cells are carried forward with other microscopic particles to the next stage for removal. The microscopic particles of dirt have an electric charge which prevents them settling out, and so this charge is neutralised by adding an iron salt, ferric sulfate. The iron coagulates the particles of dirt and the dead algal cells in what's called the flash mixer. As the coagulated water leaves the flash mixer, polyelectrolyte is added to start the process known as flocculation. This is a process where the coagulated particles come together to form a more visible flock. These are then removed in the settling tanks. The next part of the process is where we soften the water. The water from the rivers is very hard, so we need to take out some of the chalk substances to make the water softer. We do this by adding lime to the water, but when you add lime, or calcium hydroxide as it's called, to hard water, you make chalk and a softer water. The process we use is known as pellet reaction, and this takes place in large steel vessels. Hard water enters at the bottom of the vessel, where lime dissolved in water is added. This causes the calcium to precipitate as a chalky calcium carbonate. Fine grains of silver sand are added. Onto these, the chalk is deposited, forming larger pellets and leaving a partially softened water. The water now leaves the softening tanks and comes into the sand filters.
As the water passes through the sand, all the dirt particles are left in the sand, and we collect the clear water underneath. However, the sand blocks up after a while, so every 48 hours we have to drain the filter, and we wash it by blowing air and water up from underneath the sand.
The water now looks just like the drinking water you get from your tap, but we still have to remove a few other things. Our water, because it's coming from arable farmland, contains minute pesticide residues. So once again, we add ozone to remove these from the drinking water. This very powerful oxidant blows apart the pesticide molecules, and it leaves the water free from most organic chemicals. This second exposure to ozone takes place in large tanks, so that the water flowing through the tanks meets a gas at 3 points. This ensures that the gas can act effectively without having the risk of too great a concentration in one place. Any remaining material is now collected by passing the water through granular activated carbon. This is charcoal which has been specially treated to give it a very large surface area for absorbing organic molecules. We've now come to the end of the treatment process, and it only remains to chlorinate the water to disinfect it before it goes off on its way to our customers.
Most of water is taken from rivers, but before it can be piped to our taps, it needs to go through a multi-stage treatment process. River water passes through these screens, and then through a second, finer set of screens called band screens. Thereafter, it's pumped into a reservoir. The water stays in the reservoir phase, so a lot of natural treatment actually takes place here. Solid material settles out in the still water. Some of the organic matter in the water is oxidized by bacteria, which use dissolved oxygen produced by algae. Additionally, some of the pathogens that are present are inactivated by ultraviolet rays from sunlight. To minimize the quantity of algae drawn into the treatment works, the water is extracted about 15 meters below the surface. It's inevitable that there will be some algae in the water entering the plant, and so the first thing that happens is that the water's exposed to ozone gas to kill any algae. Pure ozone is bubbled through the water in specially designed tanks. To ensure adequate treatment, the gas is released at several points. And as the water is forced through the tank, it has to negotiate baffles that ensure it remains in contact with the ozone for as long as possible. The dead algae are held in suspension and are carried forward to the next stage. As ozone is a highly toxic gas, any unused ozone, which is a minuscule amount, is collected and converted into oxygen in an ozone destructor. This is achieved by passing it over hot copper plates at a temperature in excess of 300 degrees Celsius. For safety, there's a comprehensive system of ozone detectors and alarms at numerous points on site. The starches released from the dead algal cells form a scum on the water surface. The water, along with the scum, is then dosed with ferric sulfate to bring the dead algal cells together within flocks of ferric hydroxide. After dosing, the water flows into the large tank of a pulsator. There are 3 such units on site. Within each one, a large volume of water is raised by vacuum and then suddenly allowed to come crashing down. The resulting shock wave forces the flocks to collect as a sludge blanket towards the bottom of the tank. Periodically, the sludge is pumped out of the tank and sent to lagoons, where the solids settle and supernatant flows back into the reservoir. The clarified water is pumped from the top of the pulsators into the bottom of large conical pellet softeners. Softening is necessary to stop an excessive build-up of scale on domestic appliances such as kettles and irons. In the softening process, the hard water is mixed with a calcium hydroxide solution, and then it rises through a blanket of silver sand. A precipitate of calcium carbonate forms on the grains of sand, rather like a pearl developing in an oyster. After about 3 days, beads of calcium carbonate that are between 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter have formed, but because of their size they sink and can be removed. These beads are very hard and are sold to the construction industry for use in bead blasting. The now softened water leaves the top of the conical tanks and goes to the rapid gravity sand filters. This one's partially empty, so that you can see the outflow trough, which is an important part of the maintenance routine. Though normally the tank is full. Sand in the bottom of the filter acts as a strainer to remove any remaining solid matter from the water. When the sand is choked full of solids, the filters stop working, and so they're backwashed. Backwashing comprises 5 stages. First, the water flowing into the filter is stopped, and consequently the water level drops. Air is then pumped up through the 1-meter thick sand filter. This produces a scouring action, and any accumulated solids in the bed are dislodged and rise to the surface as scum. Clean water is pumped in, and this fluidizes the bed of sand so that the dirt is now in suspension above the sand. The water flow is then increased so that the scum and the dirty water cascade into the outflow trough. The dirty water is sent to lagoons where the solids again settle out, and once more the supernatant flows back to the reservoir. Once the outflow is seen to be clean, the backwashing cycle is terminated. The tank is filled, and filtration begins again. This is the last point in the process where the water is exposed to light. The clean water from the rapid gravity filters is then pumped into secondary ozonation tanks, primarily to break down any pesticides that may be present in the water. But also the ozone oxidizes any trace organic compounds and kills any viruses and bacteria. Furthermore, ozonation destroys potential carcinogens, odours and taste-conferring compounds. The baffles in the tank are made from stainless steel to avoid any contamination. After final ozonation, the water passes through granular activated carbon, where any remaining byproducts are adsorbed and thereby removed from the water. Some of the adsorbed material is broken down by bacteria, but eventually the carbon becomes saturated and has to be regenerated by burning off the adsorbed organics. By now, the water is very clean, and the process is almost complete. Chlorine is added to kill any remaining pathogenic bacteria present. And the final step occurs underground in a contact tank. Here the water is held for a carefully calculated residence time of about 4 hours to allow the chlorine to take effect. From the tank, it flows into the network of pipelines and service reservoirs en route to the consumer.
But what happens with the water when you've used it?
Originally established by the Royal Commission on Sewage Disposal, 1898, 1915, objectives of sewerage treatment had as follows. to avoid pestilence and nuisance, disease and odor, the protection of potable water sources from pollution by sewerage discharge, and to produce effluents, which after dilution with river water are suitable for abstraction as sources of potable supply.
Sewage is a complex mixture of suspended and dissolved materials. Both categories constitute organic pollution. The strength of sewage and the quality of sewage effluent are described in terms of their suspended solids and biochemical oxygen demand. These two measures were originally either proposed or devised by the Royal Commission. The suspended solids are determined by weighing, after the filtration of a known volume of sample through a standard glass fiber filter paper, the results being expressed in milligrams per liter. Dissolved pollutants are determined by the biochemical oxygen demand they exert when incubated for 5 days at 20 degrees Celsius. Samples require appropriate dilution with oxygen-saturated water and suitable replication. The oxygen consumed is determined and the results are again expressed in milligrams per liter. The two standards for sewage effluent quality proposed by the Royal Commission were for no more than 30 mg per liter of suspended solids and 20 mg per liter for biochemical oxygen demand, the so-called 30 to 20 standard. The Royal Commission envisaged that the effluent of this standard would be diluted 8 to 1, with clean river water having biochemical oxygen demand of 2 mg per liter or less. This standard was considered to be the normal minimum requirement, and was not enforced by statute because the character and use of rivers varied so greatly. Currently, most sewage treatment works are required to meet discharge standards set by the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive.
The flow of sanitary sewage alone in the absence of storms in dry season is known as dry weather flow, DWF.
Where does it all go? You just push the lever and it's gone. So how does it all work? Can anything go down there? Are there even any rules? And is the sink any different? The bathroom sink, the kitchen sink? Actually, there is no difference. Sink, toilet, same thing. Behind these walls and under these floors, all the drains meet up in a single pipe and head toward the sewers.
In going about our everyday lives, we use a lot of water for drinking, washing, cooking, going to the toilet and much more. By using this water, it becomes polluted. The wastewater we produce is known as sewage.
Everything that leaves the house through the main drain pipe meets up with the sewer, right down here. In some places, it's a combined sewer, both wastewater and stormwater. In other words, everything from inside your house and everything from outside your house, rain, whatever, goes into a single combined sewer.
Offices, shops, factories and other industries. Together with rainwater that runs off roofs and roads, sewage is washed, flushed or drained into sewers. The underground network of sewers that collect all this wastewater and transports it to the sewage works is known as the sewerage system, and the area it drains is the catchment area.
All of it heads towards the wastewater treatment plant. In some places, the sewers are separated, one for wastewater and the other for stormwater. In that case, only the wastewater heads towards the wastewater treatment plant. The storm sewer goes straight to the river, untreated, because it's only water, right? Actually, no, it isn't. All the chemicals that you put on your lawn or the soap with all the phosphates that you wash your car with all head out in the storm sewer if you've got a separated system. Straight into the river. All the wastewater ends up at wastewater treatment plants. The purpose of these plants is to remove all solids and pathogens, microorganisms like bacteria and stuff, from the wastewater, so when it gets reintroduced to the river, it's cleaner than when it arrived at the wastewater treatment plant. When it arrives, coarse screens remove large solids, rags, and debris from wastewater and are immediately disposed of. It's here that you see some of the most ridiculous things people have put down their toilets, drains, and sewers. At least this stuff made it this far. Some things that the water can't dissolve end up stuck in the sewers, leading to sewers being clogged and homes being flooded. After this, fine screens are used to remove the smaller material in the same way. Next up is grit removal. Grit includes sand, gravel, and other heavy solid materials that are heavier than the organic solids in the wastewater. Removal of grit happens by getting the wastewater to flow in a spiral pattern. Heavier particles settle at the bottom of the tank, while lighter organic particles are suspended and eventually carried out of the tank. From there, that water is sent into a settling basin. This is where suspended solids settle out and floating scum is removed by skimmers. Scrapers in the tank move continuously along the bottom to deposit the raw sludge into hoppers, which is sent to a nearby plant where it's made into pellets for fertilizer. After the settling basins, the wastewater is sent to the next step by an Archimedes screw pump, which forces the liquid upwards. The revolutions raise the water thread by thread until it comes out at the top of the cylinder. There it is met by the fine curve screen, where small items that have made it through the initial screening process are removed. Things like fruit and vegetable stickers. They don't dissolve and they clog up the system, so when you're peeling them off, throw them in the garbage, not down the sink. Now it's time to get the stuff you can't see. Some of this work is done by biological aerated filters. Essentially what happens here is that good microorganisms attached to porous rock eat up the bad microorganisms. The wastewater is pumped up through the rocks and the bacteria in the water sticks to the rocks. Bubbles are pumped in to keep the good bacteria alive and working. The clean water goes up and the rocks with the bad bacteria attached to them go back down. This cleansed water then flows into a channel on its way to be treated by ultraviolet light. The water passes high-output UV lamps, where light disrupts the molecular structure of DNA molecules in the microorganisms. This renders the cells unable to replicate before they die. The disinfection stage takes seconds, eliminates the need for chlorine, and makes the final process much safer.
Let's look now at the sewage treatment process.
A sewage work such as this treats nearly 40,000 cubic metres of mainly domestic sewage each day. At this site, trade waste from 2 local food manufacturers comprises about 8% of the total flow. Rainwater runoff, referred to as surface flow, is also treated. For simplicity, we'll refer to all the incoming wastewaters as sewage.
At the sewage treatment works, the incoming waste passes through screens which remove large pieces of debris, such as plastic, paper and cloth. The liquid then flows through a number of channels which take out any grit washed in from roads.
The raw sewage entering the works passes through 6mm mesh screens. The collected solid matter is called screenings and typically comprises rags, cotton buds, sanitary products and paper. The screenings are compacted and sent to landfill. The sewage then flows to a grit extractor of the cross-flow type. Where road grit and other inorganic matter settle out. This material is subsequently washed and also sent to landfill.
The sewage is then passed forward to large tanks. Here, fine particles sink to the bottom and form a sludge, which is regularly removed and further treated.
On leaving the grit extractor, the sewage enters the primary settlement tanks. Here, approximately 70% of the remaining solid matter settles out and forms primary sludge, which collects in a sump at the bottom of the tank. Periodically, the sludge is pumped away for disposal or for treatment. Above the sludge lies the wastewater. It now has a greatly reduced amount of suspended solids, and with it about 30% less biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD for short.
Here we use bacteria to clean up the liquid sewage. The bacteria help purify the liquid by actively feeding on it and turning most of it into carbon dioxide, water and nitrogen. In biological filters, we encourage bacteria to grow in deep beds of irregularly shaped stones. Gaps between the stones circulate air, which lets the bacteria breathe and thrive as the liquid passes through them. An alternative to biological filters is a process called activated sludge, where air is bubbled through the sewage to encourage bacteriological growth. The air can then be pumped or entrained from the surface by rotating paddles. Either way, once the bacteria have done their work, the liquid goes into further settling tanks to remove the remaining particles, leaving clean water to flow to the river or, if necessary, onward to further treatment.
On this site, the wastewater is treated in one of 3 different types of biological system, namely biological filters, activated sludge units, or oxygen ditches. First, there were only the biological filters, but over the years, the activated sludge units and oxygen ditches were installed. Here you can see the rectangular biological filters. In many works, they're circular. But irrespective of their shape, biological filters are robust and easy to operate. Microorganisms growing on the clinker in the bed break down the organic matter in the effluent. On leaving the filters, the effluent is dosed with ferric sulfate in order to precipitate out the phosphates. This prevents eutrophication occurring in the river when the treated effluent is finally discharged at the end of the process. The effluent then goes to a humus tank for secondary settlement, where microbial solids and precipitated phosphates settle out and are removed as sludge. You can see that the water looks much cleaner than it was at the inlet. An alternative to the biological filter is the activated sludge unit. Here the wastewater is aerated and mixed by fine bubbles of air blown through hundreds of ceramic or plastic diffusers such as this. The organic matter in the sewage is again broken down by microorganisms, but this time they're suspended in the mixed liquor in the tank. The remaining system is the oxygen ditch, where almost 1/5 of the sewage at this plant is treated. Interestingly, the oxygen ditch doesn't require primary settlement. The sewage is aerated with the help of large brush aerators, and the effluent moves around the ditch, allowing the organic matter to be degraded by microbes in suspension. On exiting, it goes to a settlement tank and then to the gravel filter. Treated effluent from all 3 systems comes together before discharge into the nearby river.
In simplistic terms, nitrogen in various forms is flushed, rinsed, or otherwise introduced into the sewer system. Almost all of this organic nitrogen, urea for example, is immediately hydrolyzed into ammonia. In water, gaseous ammonia, NH3, is almost entirely converted to ionized ammonia, or ammonium, NH4+. Specialized autotrophic bacteria, or nitrifiers, convert the ammonium to nitrite, NO2, and then to nitrate, NO3, through various biological processes. As dissolved oxygen is depleted by the nitrifiers and other organisms in the basin, other specialized heterotrophic bacteria, denitrifiers, are able to thrive by using the oxygen attached to the nitrate molecules for respiration, creating nitrogen gas as a byproduct. The nitrogen gas then simply bubbles out of the water into the atmosphere. Pretty slick, right? Well, let's go back to the beginning and take a closer look at each of these important steps in the nitrogen removal process. First, as a natural reaction in an aqueous solution, or in water, the vast majority of the organic nitrogen immediately hydrolyzes into ammonia. Most of this ammonia automatically converts to the ionic form ammonium. The equilibrium between the gaseous and ionic forms of ammonia is heavily impacted by the pH of the water. A more acidic solution will favor the ionic form ammonium. A more basic will favor the gaseous form ammonia. Since wastewater typically ranges between a pH of 6 and 9, almost all of the ammonia will be in the ionic form. Since ammonia testing accounts for both forms, ionic and gaseous, it is not necessary to worry about each form separately. No bacteria is necessary for this conversion, it just happens. The next step in the process consists of converting ammonium to nitrite and then nitrate. This two-step process is usually lumped into one term, nitrification. This step is facilitated by a specialized autotrophic bacteria. So what does autotrophic mean? There are two broad categories for how organisms obtain carbon required for growth: autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are able to obtain their carbon from non-organic sources, such as carbon dioxide and the alkaline bicarbonate. Plants are good examples of how this is done. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, require organic sources of carbon. Essentially, heterotrophs get carbon by consuming other organic compounds, humans and animals being good examples. In contrast to heterotrophic BOD-consuming bacteria, autotrophic nitrifiers require more time to mature and maintain their population in a biological wastewater treatment system. The nitrifiers dictate the SRT in nitrogen-reducing plants. How fast nitrifiers grow depends on the temperature of the wastewater and the amount of dissolved oxygen present. If nitrifiers aren't allowed enough time to thrive, you run the risk of accidentally wasting them out of the system entirely and losing nitrification. Higher temperatures and DO concentrations means faster growth. Colder temperatures and lower DO concentrations means slower growth. Also, when no DO is present, nitrifiers can become completely inactive. As a note, it is important to remember that nitrifiers are also quite sensitive to pH, tending to function most comfortably in water with a pH between 6.8 and 7.5. Once a healthy population of nitrifiers has developed in your system, the first step, performed largely by a group of bugs known as ammonia oxidizers, will take the ammonium and DO and convert it into acid, water, nitrite, and energy. If your system doesn't have adequate alkalinity, the acid produced here could create inhospitably acidic conditions for the bacteria, resulting in major process hiccups including loss of nitrification. The water produced is absorbed in the system, the nitrate moves on to the next step, and the energy is used by the bacteria to grow and multiply. The second step, for which a group of bugs known as nitrite oxidizers is largely responsible, takes that nitrite and more DO and converts it into nitrate and energy. This conversion from ammonia to nitrate is nitrification. Typically, full nitrification is observed when ammonia concentrations are reduced to less than 2 milligrams per liter and nitrite concentrations to less than half a milligram per liter. As mentioned, nitrification is a very oxygen-hungry process. As a comparison, in order to remove 1 pound of BOD, 1.2 pounds of oxygen are required. However, to reduce 1 pound of ammonia to nitrate, 4.6 pounds of oxygen are required. Since getting dissolved oxygen into wastewater is a very energy-intensive process, it would benefit every treatment plant's electrical bill if they didn't aerate more than they needed to. Over-aerating does nothing to improve the process. It really is flushing money down the toilet. After nitrification, the nitrogen is still in the system, mostly as part of the bugs and in the form of nitrate. Though not as toxic as ammonia, nitrates can still contribute to eutrophication and if released into a source supplying drinking water, can endanger human populations, specifically infants, causing what is known as blue baby syndrome, by interfering with blood oxygenation. The final step in completely removing nitrogen from the system is called denitrification. Since nitrification is converting ammonia to nitrate, one could think that denitrification is simply the reversal of this process. Confusingly, yet fortunately, this is not the case. Denitrification is performed by a specialized heterotrophic bacteria. These guys require some pretty specific conditions to perform this step. First of all, they need some food, or BOD. In order to oxidize that food, they need oxygen. Their easiest and first choice for oxygen is DO. If there is no DO present, however, they look to alternative sources, such as nitrate. These specialists have the ability to strip the oxygen from nitrate molecules to satisfy their needs. This critical environment where DO is not present, yet nitrates are, is referred to as anoxic, and is absolutely required for denitrification. These bugs take the BOD and nitrate to produce energy, base, and nitrogen gas. The base is actually very useful in buffering the acid produced during nitrification. The nitrogen gas then floats in tiny bubbles to the surface and into the atmosphere. Though great in the biological basin, denitrification in a clarifier can result in undesirable floating sludge. There are many alternative strategies for developing anoxic conditions. Some treatment plants are designed to have dedicated anoxic zone volumes in the flowchart, while others strive to develop these anoxic zones within the oxidation ditch or aeration zone by rigidly controlling aeration or by turning off aerators for set periods of time. Additionally, under certain conditions, microanoxic zones can be developed within the bacterial flux themselves, resulting in what is referred to as simultaneous nitrification-denitrification. Various levels of denitrification may be required depending on the local discharge permit. However, full biological denitrification typically results in only 1 to 3 milligrams of nitrate in the effluent stream.
To meet increasingly stringent standards, the cleaned water is often put through a further filtration process. Sometimes shallow gravel beds are used to filter out any fine particles. Alternatively, beds of reeds can also be used to give a final polish to the cleaned water before it's returned to the environment. This method is particularly useful in rural locations.
To improve the water quality further, the effluent is filtered through gravel filters, sometimes referred to as deep sand filters. Once these filters are full of solids, they're backwashed, and the washings go to the inlet of the works. The treated effluent is now suitable for discharge to a river. Water quality is constantly measured using remote automatic sensors and double-checked periodically by technicians. The final output from this works is well inside the statutory requirements. The works can fully treat 3 times dry weather flow. If the incoming flow is greater, then after passing through the grit extractor, the excess cascades over this weir into the channel on the left and flows into storm tanks. Here, just under 14,500 cubic metres of sewage can be stored and treated later. This is the equivalent to 3 times dry weather flow for 2 hours. In the unlikely event that the flow to the works is greater than 6 times the dry weather flow, the storm tanks are designed to overflow and discharge direct to the river. Only in exceptionally heavy rainfall would this occur, typically about 12 to 15 times a year. This isn't as bad as it sounds. Firstly, the effluent is highly diluted with rain. And secondly, the river will be in spate, and hence further dilution of the effluent takes place, thus minimising its impact on the environment.
So let's recap. Wastewater leaves your house, gets treated at the wastewater treatment plant, and returns here. The same place your drinking water comes from. Why it's important to pay attention to what you put down sinks, toilets, and sewers.
Number 1, number 2, and TP. That's it. That's all that goes down there. Oh, and TP? It means toilet paper. Oh yeah, and this? Soap and water. That's it.
The purpose of wastewater treatment is to remove all solids and pathogens. You know, microorganisms like bacteria and stuff.
The purpose of a wastewater treatment plant is to accelerate nature, specifically to develop specific conditions to grow some special bugs. So what are these bugs? All of the bugs being grown in the wastewater treatment plant are natural and perform the same tasks, albeit in a little less dense populations, in water and soil around the world. The vast majority consist of various populations of bacteria who perform the bulk of the wastewater treatment process, such as BOD removal, nitrification, denitrification, phosphorus uptake, and so on. Generally, these bacteria are pretty boring to look at under the microscope. But not all the bugs are boring. Looking at a sample under the microscope will, in fact, reveal some other more exciting guys. They don't really contribute much to the overall process, but can play an important role in process control. So who are these guys? Let me make a note here that some of these guys will vary from process to process, so you'll have to get to know your own population. Let's take a look at a family called stalk ciliates first. Here we have a couple varieties that we're going to talk about. First is Vorticella. These guys attach onto a flock of bacteria and have a retractable tail. They can be pretty quick. Then there's Epistylus. Similar to Vorticella, Epistylus also uses his tail to latch onto bacterial flock formations. However, this guy's a little bit more passive and does not have the retractable feature, so he doesn't move around as much. Now to the family of the free-swimming ciliates. These guys also come in a few different varieties. Here's an Aspidisca. These little critters are easily identified by their many crawling legs. Say hello to Litonitis. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. And here is Trichophyllum. Look at this guy go. Ah yes, and rotifers. These are a higher life form with cool hairy mouths and are much larger than many of the other bugs we see here. Some forms are much more mobile and move around constantly. Others, a little bit less active. On our worm friends, the nematodes. These tiny worms, who can be active or just swimming lazily around the neighborhood, can also be an indicator of some certain conditions. Both nematodes and rotifers can be indicative of an older bacterial biomass and in wastewater are indicative of a higher degree of purification or seeding from an attached growth system. Another important bacteria to note are called filamentous bacteria. These include Microthrix parvicella, Nocardia, Thiothrix, and a whole bunch of other characters with no names but are classified as type blank 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 blank, like type 0914. As you would expect, filaments can also be used to identify conditions of sludge. There is a whole suite of indicator tests available to identify which kind are present in your sludge. So, do we care who's in our process and how many of them there are? Great question. The answer is yes. Here's why.
Researchers in England several years ago evaluated the presence of ciliated organisms in treatment plants. What they did was compare the effluent quality to the organisms that were present. And they developed a table which correlated which organisms were present based upon what the effluent quality was like. By identifying the filaments and by quantifying and tracking their presence, one can use that information to understand and identify the potential effluent quality you would see. For example, Vorticella and Epistylus are seen normally with high quality effluents, whereas Opiculera is seen more often in a lower quality effluent. This English study was updated to reflect the condition for nitrification in a wastewater treatment plant. And what they did was compare what particular ciliated organisms were present when nitrification was occurring and what organisms were present when it was no longer nitrifying. In this second study, a table was prepared and it showed the abundance of organisms that are more likely to reflect nitrifying conditions versus those that are present when non-nitrifying conditions occur. In all of these studies, it was stressed by the researchers and should be understood by anyone using this identification technique that the relative abundance will probably change based upon the specific operating conditions and the wastewater stream characteristics for each and every wastewater treatment plant. As such, the tables provide a good starting point, but should only be used as a starting point, and if one wants to be certain what's going on, they develop the table for their own facility. Using these studies, one can see that when you see critters such as Vorticella, when you see the shelled amoebas, when you see some types of rotifers, you see those only when there's low BOD present in the wastewater. That's not always the case, but it's usually an indication that those conditions are present. The best solution for any wastewater treatment plant is to do their own analysis, prepare their own table. And if you do that, you'll be able to use the stock ciliates, the rotifers, and the amoebas to indicate what is happening and possibly predict the future of when it's going to change.
As previously touched upon, filament tracking can be another powerful tool to monitor conditions in a wastewater treatment plant. The abundance and type of filaments present can indicate various process conditions such as low dissolved oxygen, low F to M ratio, septicity, excessive grease and oil, nutrient deficiency, and low pH. Tracking filaments requires the use of staining tests, tests for sulfur granules, cell size, and presence of septa, as well as identification of attached growth on the filament. Jenkins, Richards, and Diager developed a chart to use in the evaluation process. With sufficient testing, the exact filament can be identified. The dominance of a filament indicates the operating conditions. If you want to change the biomass, change the underlying condition which supports that filament. For example, type 1701 indicates a low DO, where type 1851 indicates a low F to M ratio. So what physical parameters could very well correlate with your microorganism populations? Well, the following list is a good beginning. SVI and settling rates, temperature, BOD, TSS and nutrient removal rates, dissolved oxygen levels, F to M ratios, wasting rates and SRT, mixed liquor concentration, pH, and the presence of pollutants. Once you identify and track indicator organisms, you can change the conditions you have control over, such as the mixed liquor concentration, aeration, RAS flow, pH adjustments, and nutrient deficiencies.
This is Beckton Sewage Works in East London, the largest sewage plant in Europe. Over 300 acres, fenced off from curious eyes, the sheer scale only comprehensible from the air. This one plant has to deal with the sewage and waste of all of North London, over 3.5 million people producing more than 12 million gallons of waste every hour. These bubbling tanks of raw effluent are being slowly purified through a complex series of tanks and filters. And after this water is so clear, it can be pumped straight out into the Thames.
This is Beckton Sewage Treatment Works in the east of London, and it's Europe's biggest. It was originally part of Joseph Bazalgette's scheme.
In the 19th century, sewage was simply stored here in tanks, then pumped out to the river at high tide. So you'll be pleased to know today's process is a lot more refined and takes just 4 hours for raw sewage to be clean enough to return to the river.
Every day, this treatment works handles the sewage from 3.4 million Londoners. Now that's an astonishing volume. It equates to 34 Olympic swimming pools every hour.
The first process happens here at the inlet works. Using these screens, large lumps like bricks, wood, rags are raked out.
Once collected, these large objects will all be washed and sent to a landfill site nearby.
They've even had half a car here.
Meanwhile, the remaining sewage passes on to the next part of the process into these primary settlement tanks.
Now, very basically, it enters at that end and flows relatively slowly this way.
Over the top of each tank is a moving bridge, which has 2 blades to remove solid organic material from the sewage. The top blade skims scum from the surface, while a second submerged blade dredges the heavier settled sludge from the bottom of the tank. All this solid sludge is then sent for further processing.
The remaining sewage then flows down this way towards the secondary biological treatment process.
And here it is. In these tanks, the sewage is mixed in with billions upon billions of bacteria, so all the dissolved materials that still remain can be biodegraded.
And pumping air from below at very high pressures causes the sewage to be saturated with dissolved oxygen, and this accelerates the biological breakdown.
It's brilliant.
Finally, the treated effluent is tested to ensure it's clean enough to go back into the Thames. Remember all of the solids which were skimmed off earlier? They're taken to a processing plant.
All sludges are brought to this filter press where it's dewatered, and the resulting sludge cake is incinerated, and that provides 75% of this entire work's power needs.
Biosolids are the nutrient-rich byproduct of modern municipal wastewater treatment. Since the 1980s, the management of these organic solids has been increasingly focused on recycling. Efforts to control pollution at its source have dramatically improved the quality of wastewater coming into treatment plants, and the quality biosolids now produced by these plants.
The sludge from the primary and secondary settling tanks is thickened in a picket fence thickener, then centrifuged, and finally lime is added to stabilize it. Sewage sludge can be anaerobically digested to produce a combustible gas, buried in landfill sites, composted, or incinerated. But most of it's transported to farms for use as a soil conditioner.
In our main wastewater treatment process, we took the contaminants out of the wastewater and concentrated them in the sludge. Now we've got to treat the sludge in order to make it less toxic, to destroy the pathogens, and have less of an impact on the environment. We also want to make it where it's easier to handle. In the processes that we're going to look at, they include thickening, digestion, and dewatering. These processes will take the sludge, recover some of the energy from it that we can use to power our wastewater treatment plant, and also turn out a beneficial product that can be used for soil conditioning. This is the sludge thickening process. It's the first step in the solids handling processes, and it's very similar to the clarifiers that we looked at before, where we slow the water down and allow the solids to settle out. But the special feature of thickening is that we're taking our solids concentrations from about 0.5% all the way up to 6% solids. The reason we do that is so that we have less energy to pump the solids and so that we have a better treatment in the remainder of the solids handling processes. In the gravity thickener, we use gravity to settle the sludge out and make it thicker so it's easier to treat in the rest of the solids handling facilities. In this facility, it's a dissolved air flotation thickener, or a DAFT, and in it we take and dissolve air in the sludge under pressure, then we release that pressure and the sludge floats to the top. We end up with about a 5% solids blanket on the top, which we scrape off and send to our solids handling facilities for digestion. We're in the pump gallery for the sludge digesters. We've thickened the sludge in the sludge thickeners and we've sent it over here to the digesters. In the digesters, we heat the sludge up and the microorganisms start to break it down, get rid of some of the volatile compounds, make it to where it won't degrade any further. In that process, it also destroys some of the pathogens. When we're finished, the sludge is turned into a useful product. But during that process, we also generate some methane. That methane gas we can use to run generators, and those generators power part of our wastewater treatment plant. They also generate waste heat, which we use to heat up the digestion process. So it's a nice circle. We use a whole lot of the energy that's stored inside that sludge to make our process cheaper to operate. This is the digested sludge. After we've used microorganisms and heat to destroy the pathogens and reduce the material that might degrade further and cause odor problems. But there's still a lot of water left in this sludge, so we're going to have to do some dewatering process to get rid of the water, make it easier to handle, cheaper to transport, and so that we can land apply it as a soil conditioner.
The use of biosolids has come under considerable public and regulatory scrutiny. Regulations for wastewater solids are highly protective of human health and the environment.
In 2009, wastewater sludge production in UK amounted to around 1.2 megatons of dry solids, of which 77% was recycled to agricultural land, and for EU as a whole there are about 6.5 megatons of dry solids produced annually. In the next decade, sludge disposal to all the established outlets could become increasingly difficult. The challenges faced had been how to maintain cost-effective and secure methods of sludge disposal, and engender public confidence in all disposal and recycling options. Of increased importance is the potential of renewable energy from the anaerobic digestion of sewage sludge. Sludge treatment and disposal may account for 40% of the operating costs of a wastewater treatment facility.
Treatment process begins with the separation of sewage into solid and liquid material. The solid waste, or sludge, is broken down by bacteria in digestion tanks. One of the byproducts of sludge digestion is biogas, containing a high proportion of methane. In the past, at most sites, the gas had only been used to fuel a hot water boiler, which then heated the digestion tanks. But there's far more gas produced than is actually needed for heating. The only way of disposing of the excess gas was to burn it off using a flare stack. Environmentally, that's not a great solution. By far the best option is to take all of the potential energy in methane gas produced by the digestion process and use it in a combined heat and power plant. Here, methane gas from the digestion process is used to fuel modern, highly efficient engines, driving alternators to produce electricity. At the same time, heat produced by the engines is transferred via a hot water system to the digestion tanks. It's a very efficient and self-fueling process, and the fuel is free.
The remaining sludge can then be used as a fertilizer on local farms.
By rethinking how we manage and use our water, we can begin to solve many of the problems. We've all learned about reducing, reusing, and recycling our trash. We need to learn to apply these 3 R's to all of our resources, especially water. The water supply guys use the term integrated water management. But like we said, they're only concerned with water supply and not the big picture. True integrated water management means holistic reform that integrates multiple agencies and members of the public and solves multiple problems beyond just meeting our ever-increasing water demands. If we take a closer look at how we use water at home, there are many opportunities to conserve and minimize our own water footprint. First of all, we can reduce our water consumption with low-flow shower heads, modern clothes washers, and other smart appliances. Although our sewer systems are designed to process human waste, we put many other things down our sewer lines, like kitchen scraps, cleaners, drugs, and other chemicals which can get into our rivers and ocean, harming fish and other aquatic life. We should think before we use our drains for waste disposal. In many homes, more than half of the water used goes to maintain a big green lawn, wasting water that we could drink or leave in place for fish and other wildlife. Plants adapted to our region's climate and soil require a lot less water and maintenance. Replacing a part of our lawn with native plants can save up to half of our household water use. An ocean-friendly garden conserves water and reduces polluted runoff, helping to reduce flooding and keep pollution out of our creeks and coastal waters, while giving you a beautiful garden full of new wildlife. A really fun alternative to boring grass. By contouring the land, adding dry creeks or seasonal ponds, and using permeable solutions for our walkways and driveways, runoff can soak into the soil to recharge local aquifers. We can also capture rain from our gutter with a simple rain barrel and keep it for reuse later. Much of the water that we use inside our homes can also be reused on our gardens. Called gray water. This is slowly being accepted as a great way to reuse the water from your clothes washer or bathtub to water the plants in your garden. Reusing our slightly used water in this way not only helps reduce our water demand, but it also reduces the amount of water we send to the wastewater treatment plant every day. These basic ideas can be applied on a larger scale, within our neighborhood or our entire city. Think of the benefits reaped by entire neighborhoods that reduce water use, capture rainwater, and eliminate water pollution. We can redesign our communities to capture rain close to the source to filter back into the ground like the natural water cycle, or to store it for reuse during dry times. The streets in our neighborhood can be landscaped with contoured ditches, known as bioswales. These capture street runoff so trees and plants can use and filter the water. Where space is limited, large underground cisterns can collect stormwater for later use. Pervious pavement can filter rainwater through parking lots, reducing runoff. Known as low-impact development, it's rapidly catching on. Low-impact development can transform the landscape from one that sheds water, causing flooding and water pollution, back to a more natural state that captures and absorbs water. Many treatment plants can generate energy from solid waste, and new technologies may make it possible to generate enough to operate the plant as well as provide a local source of biofuel. If we rethink how we transport and process wastewater, new opportunities arise. Many cities are now reclaiming wastewater, that's right, sewage, for reuse in our homes and businesses, or for direct recharge of aquifers. One of the best opportunities for wastewater is recycling it to drinking standards. Potable reuse is the process of purifying our wastewater to make it drinkable. Wastewater from homes and businesses is forced through very fine filters, allowing water molecules through while trapping dissolved salts and other impurities. Potable reuse is an efficient source of water because it makes use of water that is already in our local water system. And it is also good for the environment because it takes impurities out of the system, eliminating the need to discharge polluted wastewater into the ocean. Communities around the country are already drinking it as part of their normal water supply.
Turning raw sewage into drinking water doesn't sound terribly appetizing, but that's what's happening in Orange County in Southern California. Orange County faces chronic water shortages. To meet the needs of its growing population, the county spent $500 million on a state-of-the-art water treatment plant. It's the first of its kind in the United States.
There's few new sources of water, and this is going to be one that's going to be key. Environmentally friendly, cost competitive, and it recycles.
The facility treats the sewage with advanced filtration techniques, such as reverse osmosis, where high pressure sends water molecules through ultrafine membranes. Ultraviolet light is also used to remove contaminants. But the biggest challenges are not technological.
One of the problems these type of projects has to overcome is separating the toilet from the tap. The process is state-of-the-art technology, but unless the people are willing to accept the water, all the engineering goes for naught.
It's the idea of drinking water from a toilet that's not easy for everyone to swallow. To win over the public, the plant opens its doors daily for tours. Visits which end, of course, with a tasting session.
It's as good as any water I've ever had.
This is basically an example to the world on how you can recycle sewage.
We have to do this. I mean, we're running out of water. We've got to do this.
For the time being, the water is pumped into underground aquifers, where it will stay for several months before joining the drinking water cycle.
Now is the time for a water management system that integrates the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, to address our water crisis and help reverse the damage caused by our current mismanaged system. This truly integrated water management program creates a holistic solution that incorporates ocean-friendly gardens and low-impact development to reduce our impact on the water supply. Gray water systems encourage the reuse of our precious water resources, and potable reuse recycles the water we've already paid for and transported. We have the unique opportunity to transform water management and meet our current and future needs with science and technology that is proven to work. Residents, businesses, and government agencies must all work together to seize this opportunity and change our water habits before it's too late.